Let's talk about how Donald Trump is reshaping global politics. Because if you're confused about what Trump's doing and what it all means, you're not alone.
Everyone's confused, literally.
Just look at how much has happened since he returned to the White House.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip,
the Panama Canal.
We have to have Greenland.
Your country's in big trouble. Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking.
Reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
So how can we make sense of all this? And is Trump's foreign policy really as big a break with the past as some people are suggesting? Listen to this news anchor.
Today, Donald Trump irreparably destroyed the 80-year-old post-World War II international order.
That was a response to Trump's notorious argument with Ukraine's president on live TV in the Oval Office.
If you didn't have our military equipment,
you invited me.
For many people, it's a moment that crystallized this idea that in his second term, Donald Trump really is ripping up the rule book on how the U.S. deals with its allies and the rest of the world. But what does that actually mean? What rule book are we talking about? If there is that shift, that visible shift that people are pointing to, what has the shift been away from? What was the old rules-based order? What did that look like?
The rules-based international order was something that the United States promoted and has promoted since the Second World War. And it was this sense that there is a common framework of law, principles, norms, and rules in which countries should engage one another.
After the war, world leaders from the winning countries set up a bunch of new international organizations, like the United Nations.
Let us not fail to grasp this supreme chance to establish a worldwide rule of reason.
They also set up economic institutions like the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, and laid the foundations for a system of more open global trade. The aim of it all was to promote peace, stability, and prosperity, and encourage cooperation between countries to prevent another world war. So that's essentially what's meant by the rules-based international order. But the US, with all of its economic and military power, has always been the dominant player, and, some argue, one of the biggest beneficiaries.
Being part of an international rules-based system is what made the United States the key economic power for the last, decades and decades.
Although Donald Trump definitely doesn't see it that way, and we'll come back to that. Now, you may have also seen that system being described as the liberal international order, because of the political values like democracy and capitalism that the US and its allies promoted. That was also magnified by the Cold War, when the world got carved up into two rival blocs, the Eastern Bloc led by the Communist Soviet Union, and the Western Bloc led by the US, whose president picked up the label of the leader of the free world. The Cold War also led to the creation of NATO, the Western Military Alliance.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a cooperative shield to ward off potential communist expansion.
After the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s and the Cold War ended, there was a period when it looked like the US and its Western allies and the liberal values they said they stood for had won out. Check out this scene when the first McDonald's opened in Moscow.
McDonald's embodies the economic ambitions of the new Russia.
And think of all the Hollywood movies from around that time where an American hero defeats a Russian bad guy.
We've been in this period of very pronounced US dominance, and it has certainly helped to bring prosperity in some places. But we've also seen significant, the war on terror in the Middle East, right? Significant upheavals. I really do think, rules-based order, liberal order, they're very Washington-centric ways of saying, the world that the US has built.
And over time, the US's dominant role in that post-war global order has been questioned more and more, especially as other big countries like China and India have grown in power and economic influence. There have been a lot of calls to reform institutions like the UN to better reflect that new geopolitical landscape.
The rules-based international order was under significant strain before Donald Trump arrived on the scene. Suddenly, with Trump's return to the White House, what we've seen is that the biggest threat to global order actually comes from within the country that is the most powerful country in the world, which formerly was its champion, a guardian and underwriter, the one that, actually foot the bill for a lot of things.
Okay, history lesson over. Let's get back to Trump. If this so-called rules-based order was the old way of doing things, what is it about Trump that's so different now? Well, it's a whole mix of things. It's his actual policies, but also his style of doing politics.
He likes to keep us guessing. He feels that it's in his interest for us not quite to know what his next move might be or what exactly is motivating him.
Is there such a thing as a Trump doctrine?
Coming up with a Trump doctrine is really hard because the president is really situational and highly transactional. He doesn't really do grand strategy.
But there are some key themes. Let's start with that idea of President Trump being transactional, or you could call it Trump the deal maker. It's how he's always branded himself.
Well, that's business.
He even wrote a book about it back in the 80s based on his career in real estate.
But I really do think he sees, the world in very similar terms to he sees his real estate industry and deals, right? That you play hardball, you use whatever tools are available to you to get the best deal you can.
So for example, if you look at the way Trump deals with NATO, he sees things almost purely in financial terms. The US contributes the most to NATO when you look at direct financial contributions and its own defense spending. And Trump has made US support for NATO conditional on the other members paying more.
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend.
Now, Trump sees that as good deal making, and he has actually pushed Europe into spending much more on defense. But many analysts also see risks with Trump's transactional approach.
He is focusing on what the United States pays for things, but not what it gets out of things. And I think that's a tremendous mistake.
And that all plays into another big theme with Trump, the whole America First thing.
America first. America first. Putting America first. I put America first.
They're pursuing what they believe to be American interests. Now, we could have a debate about whether those are too narrowly construed or whether they're getting that right, but I think that really is the animating feature of his foreign policy.
One major way Trump's America First agenda is playing out is with international trade. He thinks the US has suffered under the post-war global trade rules, while other countries have benefited.
Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream.
His solution? Tariffs, which are essentially import taxes on goods made abroad to encourage companies to bring factories and jobs back to the US.
Tariffs on basically the entire world.
The biggest upheaval to international trade since World War II.
And sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
Trump's tariff announcement sent global stock markets tumbling. And then
Donald Trump backs down.
He's suspending tariffs on most nations for the next 90 days, except China. Wall Street is soaring on the news.
But with Trump's series of reversals and U-turns since taking office in January, critics say that distrust and uncertainty remain hanging over the American economy and the rest of the world.
He's not intentionally trying to immiserate the nation. He thinks that if the trade deficit is reduced, that means that Americans will be producing more here at home, and he thinks that that will enrich the United States. He's wrong about all that, but he does believe it.
There are convictions that President Trump has had that we can trace back to the 1980s, especially on the issues related to trade and commerce, where there's a sense that the U.S. doesn't come out ahead and needs to change what it's doing.
But Trump's America First approach goes well beyond trade. He's essentially abandoned the idea of the U.S. being the global cop, defending so-called Western values of democracy, human rights, and rule of law. One of his first moves in office was to pause almost all foreign aid, which he said was not aligned with American interests. And think about Trump's views on Ukraine. He's questioned what the US gets from supporting Ukraine because it's far away, saying this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. That's a real contrast to how, under President Biden, providing support to Ukraine after Russia's full-scale invasion was kind of a given. It's squared with that old world order.
If the United States walks away, it will put Ukraine at risk. Europe is at risk. the free world will be at risk, emboldening others to do what they wish to do us harm.
The U.S. has gone from that to this.
With us, you start having
not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the
president
lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
For the Trump administration, Ukraine is something of a secondary concern. It doesn't fall among the primary issues that really matter for the American national interest. And so there's a less warm relationship with President Zelensky. There's more of a willingness to do business with Russia and see if something can be worked out.
The United States is really abdicating any sense of leadership. You never hear the word leadership from this president. The United States is no longer really speaking for the West.
So that's definitely a big symbolic change. Whether it makes such a big difference in practice is more of a debate.
One could cynically argue that the United States is simply removing the facade, that deep down the system has always worked like this, but we are finally doing away with the hypocrisy. We are no longer using the old cliches about the United States being the leader of the free world and promoting freedom and democracy and protecting the underdog.
Another big theme with Trump is how so much of his foreign policy comes down to power politics, i.e., using all aspects of U.S. power to get his own way on the international stage. Again, you could easily argue that U.S. foreign policy has always been about this, but Trump does seem to be taking it to a new level.
Previously, at least, you had some liberal internationalists who were perhaps hypocritical, but who were at least trying to maintain a semblance of normality in this international relations. He's into power politics, the politics of might makes right.
It's things like threatening tariffs on your biggest trading partners to get them to take action on other issues that have nothing to do with trade. That's what he did with Canada and Mexico. Or telling Ukraine that it won't get the same level of US support unless it gives the US access to valuable minerals.
Instead of persuading other countries, it's coercing other countries.
I think President Trump has a view of the world as rather anarchic, where big powers collide, where power itself is one of the key ingredients and the key forces in the world.
Donald Trump likes what I call bullying bilateralism. Whether it's in NATO or whether it's the G7 or dealing with the EU, he doesn't like getting involved with a whole bunch of other countries. He likes to in a sense, pick them off one by one because he knows that U.S. leverage can be applied.
Now, of course, there's debate about how much Trump really has ripped up the world order, or about how orderly that system ever was. But Trump has shaken up the U.S.'s global relationships, especially with its long-standing Western allies, and they're scrambling to figure out how to adjust to a world where they can't rely on the U.S. in the same way anymore.